Most people remember Gethsemane as a garden, a quiet place, a dark place, a place near the Mount of Olives where Jesus went to pray before the cross. But the name Gethsemane carries a heavier image than many people realize. It points to an olive press. And once you see that, the scene begins to feel different. Not less holy, not less beautiful, but heavier. Because an olive press is not a place where fruit is admired. It is a place where weight comes down. It is a place where what is hidden inside is pressed out. The oil does not appear because the olive tree is peaceful. The oil appears because the olive is crushed. Now we have to be careful. The Bible does not stop and describe a working olive press beside Jesus. It does not ask us to invent details Scripture does not give. But it does give us the name, Gethsemane, and that name points to pressure. So, before Jesus is nailed to the cross in public, he kneels in a place whose very name carries the image of pressing. Before the soldiers come, there is prayer. Before the crowd gathers, there is loneliness. Before the nails, there is a cup. And before his body is given at Calvary, his will is surrendered in Gethsemane. That is the detail many people pass over. They picture trees. They picture moonlight. They picture Jesus praying while the disciples sleep. All of that belongs to the scene. But underneath it is a deeper image. The garden is also the place of pressing. And this matters because Gethsemane shows us something about Jesus that is easy to say, but hard to sit with. He did not walk toward the cross like someone untouched by sorrow. He did not pretend obedience was painless. He did not hide the weight of what was coming. He brought the pressure into prayer. That is where this story begins. Not with a speech, not with a crowd, not with a miracle. With Jesus in the night, entering a place called Gethsemane, a garden, an olive press, a place where surrender was pressed into view. When Matthew tells the story, Jesus comes to Gethsemane with his disciples. He does not arrive as a distant figure floating above the pain of the moment. He arrives with people around him. He tells most of them to sit while he goes over there to pray. Then he takes Peter, James, and John farther in. That detail matters. These are not strangers. These are men who have seen his miracles. They have heard his teaching. They have watched him touch the unclean, feed the hungry, calm the sea, and raise the dead. And now they are brought near to something different. Not a miracle in front of a crowd. Not a parable on a hillside. Not a victory that everyone can cheer. They are brought near to sorrow. Matthew says Jesus began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then Jesus says something that should slow every reader down. My soul is deeply sorrowful, even to death. This is not a decorative sentence. This is Jesus naming the weight inside the moment. He is not pretending the cup is easy. He is not acting like the coming cross is a small thing. He is not hiding the sorrow so his disciples will think obedience never trembles. He tells them the truth. Stay here. Keep watch with me. Then he goes a little farther. That phrase is easy to pass over. A little farther. The disciples are near, but not all the way in. They can be close to Jesus and still unable to carry what he is carrying. They can see him. They can hear him. They can love him. But they cannot enter the full pressure of that hour. So Jesus goes farther, and he falls on his face and prays. The prayer is not polished. It is not distant. It is not a speech made for other people to admire. My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. There is the cup. There is the pressure. There is the surrender. And this is where Gethsemane begins to open. Because the suffering of Jesus does not begin only when soldiers lay hands on him. It does not begin only when the trial starts, or when the crowd shouts, or when the nails are driven. The pressure is already here, in the garden, in the prayer, in the cup, in the silence between Jesus and the sleeping disciples. When he comes back, he finds them asleep. Peter, the one who said he would never fall away, cannot stay awake for 1 hour. And it would be easy to make the disciples look foolish here. But Luke gives us one tender detail. They were sleeping from sorrow. That does not excuse everything, but it does remind us they were not cartoon failures in the garden. They were weak men, overwhelmed men, sorrowful men. Still, the contrast remains. Jesus prays, they sleep. Jesus watches, they cannot. Jesus faces the cup, they do not understand the weight of the hour. And that loneliness is part of the pressure. He is not alone because no one is near him. He is alone because no one else can carry what he is about to carry. That is why the garden is not just scenery. It is the private place where the weight becomes visible. Before the public suffering, there is private surrender. Before the hands of men seize him, the Son has already opened his hands to the Father. Before Calvary stands Gethsemane, and before the cross comes the cup. Now watch the name. Gethsemane is commonly understood to carry the idea of an oil press or an olive press. Matthew and Mark name the place Gethsemane. Luke places the scene on the Mount of Olives. John tells us there was a garden across the Kidron Valley where Jesus and his disciples entered. So the picture comes together carefully. A garden, olive trees, a place whose name points to pressing. Again, we should not say more than Scripture says. Scripture does not stop and say, there was a working olive press beside Jesus. It does not give us a diagram of the place. It does not ask us to turn the setting into a machine. But it does give us enough to slow down. Because an olive press was not a gentle image. Olives were gathered. They were placed under weight. The fruit was crushed so the oil could be released. What was hidden inside came out through pressure. That image is not hard to see beside Jesus in the garden. Not because we are forcing the story, but because the story itself is already full of pressure. Jesus is sorrowful. Jesus is troubled. Jesus falls on his face. Jesus prays about the cup. Jesus returns and finds his closest disciples asleep. Then he goes back and prays again. The pressure is not only around him. It moves through the whole scene. And that is why Gethsemane is such a heavy name. It does not let us treat the garden as a calm waiting room before the cross. It shows us that something is already being pressed into view. The obedience of the Son, the honesty of his sorrow, the cost of the cup, the loneliness of a burden no disciple can carry for him. Olives are not pressed because they are worthless. They are pressed because something precious is inside. But even here we must be careful. This does not mean suffering is beautiful by itself. It does not mean pain should be romanticized. It does not mean every crushing season is easy to explain. And it does not mean God enjoys watching people break. Gethsemane is not a slogan about pressure. It is a holy scene where Jesus brings real sorrow to the Father. That is what makes the olive press image so powerful. It does not reduce Jesus' pain into a symbol. It helps us see the weight of his prayer. The garden is quiet, but it is not light. The disciples are near, but Jesus is still alone. The cross has not yet touched his body, but the cup is already before his soul. And in that pressure, Jesus does not run. He prays. That may be one of the deepest details in the whole scene. Jesus does not meet pressure with denial. He does not cover his sorrow with religious words. He does not perform strength for the disciples. He tells the truth. My soul is deeply sorrowful, even to death. Then he takes that sorrow to the Father. This is surrender, but it is not cold surrender. It is not the surrender of someone who feels nothing. It is the surrender of the Son who feels the weight fully and still says, "Not as I will, but as you will." That is where the olive press image becomes more than background, because pressure reveals what is inside. In Gethsemane, pressure reveals the obedience of Jesus. Not forced obedience, not shallow obedience, not easy obedience. Obedience spoken through sorrow. Obedience prayed through tears. Obedience offered when no one else can stay awake with him. The garden was not just a garden. The name points to a press, and the scene shows us what the press reveals. Not oil flowing from crushed fruit, but surrender flowing from the obedient Son. Not because Jesus is powerless, but because he gives himself willingly. Not because the pressure wins, but because love does. Now watch the design around the place. Gethsemane is a garden, but it is not the first garden that matters in Scripture. The Bible begins with a garden. In Eden, humanity stands in a place of life and receives a command. There is beauty there. There is nearness there. There is the voice of God there. But under temptation, human will turns away. The garden becomes the place where disobedience enters the story. Now, much later, Jesus enters another garden. Not in daylight, but at night. Not surrounded by innocence, but surrounded by betrayal, sorrow, weakness, and the shadow of the cross. And there, in a garden, the Son does what humanity failed to do. He does not grasp. He does not run. He does not bend the Father's will around his own comfort. He prays, "Not as I will, but as you will." We should say this carefully. The Gospels do not stop and say, "This is Eden being reversed." But the shape is hard to miss. A garden, a test, a command, a choice. One garden shows the wound of human disobedience. Another garden shows the obedience of the Son. And the name Gethsemane adds another layer. An olive press. Oil in Scripture often appears around holy service. Priests were anointed with oil. Kings were anointed with oil. Lamps burned with oil. Oil could mark consecration, light, healing, and joy. But we should not chase every oil reference until the scene becomes crowded. The point is simpler. Oil is costly because it does not come without pressure. The olive must be pressed. And in Gethsemane, the image of pressure sits beside the prayer of Jesus. This is not random decoration. This is the pattern coming into focus. The place of pressure becomes the place of surrender. The garden where disciples sleep becomes the garden where the Son watches. The night when men grow weak becomes the night when Jesus gives himself fully to the Father's will. That is why Gethsemane should not be treated as a waiting room before the cross. It is part of the road to the cross. The arrest comes after the prayer. The betrayal comes after the surrender. The hands of men seize Jesus after he has already placed himself in the Father's hands. That order matters. Jesus is not dragged into obedience. He offers himself. The soldiers will bind him, but they do not make him willing. The crowd will accuse him, but they do not create his surrender. The cross will show his body given. Gethsemane shows his will surrendered. And that is the sacred pattern underneath the place. Before public sacrifice, private obedience. Before visible wounds, invisible pressure. Before the lamb is lifted up, the Son kneels down. The garden is not just a background. The olive press is not just a word study. Together, they help us see the deeper meaning of the moment. In Eden, the human will said no in a garden of abundance. In Gethsemane, Jesus says yes in a garden of pressure. And that yes is not easy. That yes is prayed. That yes is sorrowful. That yes is costly. But that yes opens the road to the cross. Some pressure is invisible. A person can sit at a table, answer a message, go to work, speak kindly, and still feel something heavy pressing inside the soul. Not every burden announces itself. Some sorrow does not make a person loud. It makes them quiet. It makes them careful. It makes them go a little farther, because no one nearby can fully understand what they are carrying. That is part of the ache of Gethsemane. Jesus is not surrounded by enemies yet. The soldiers have not arrived yet. Judas has not kissed him yet. The trial has not begun, but the pressure is already there, and the people closest to him cannot stay awake with him. That detail is painful because it is so human. There are moments when the people who love you are still too tired, too weak, too overwhelmed, or too limited to enter the weight of what you are facing. They may be near, they may care, they may even want to be faithful, but they cannot carry the cup for you. In Gethsemane, Jesus knows that loneliness. He tells his disciples to watch with him. He returns and finds them sleeping. He speaks to Peter, but the scene is larger than Peter's failure. It shows the distance between human love and human strength. They love him, but they cannot stay awake. They are near him, but they cannot enter the depth of his sorrow. They are his disciples, but they cannot drink his cup. So Jesus goes back to prayer. That is the moment we should not rush past. He does not turn his sorrow into bitterness. He does not turn his loneliness into accusation. He does not pretend the Father is absent because the disciples are weak. He goes back to the Father, again and again. The pressure presses, but prayer remains. That is where Gethsemane becomes more than a place on a map. It becomes the place where we see surrender without pretending. Jesus does not say, "This is easy." He does not say, "This does not hurt." He does not hide the trembling honesty of the hour. He asks if the cup can pass. Then he yields. Not as I will, but as you will. That is not a cold line. It is not religious performance. It is surrender spoken inside anguish. And that matters for anyone who has ever thought obedience should always feel peaceful. Sometimes obedience feels like Gethsemane. Not because God is cruel, not because sorrow is good by itself, not because pressure should be romanticized, but because there are moments when love must say yes before the pain makes sense. There are moments when faith is not a bright feeling. It is a bowed head in the dark. It is a prayer repeated because the first prayer did not make the weight disappear. It is bringing the same cup back to the Father because there is nowhere else honest enough to take it. And this is the reversal. Gethsemane is not the place where Jesus loses control. It is the place where he gives himself fully. The pressure does not expose rebellion in him. It reveals obedience. The loneliness does not turn him away from the Father. It drives him deeper into prayer. The sleeping disciples do not stop him from loving them. He will still rise and meet the betrayer. He will still step toward the arresting crowd. He will still go to the cross. Before Jesus is lifted up publicly, he kneels privately. Before his body is offered at Calvary, his will is offered in Gethsemane. That is why the olive press image matters. Not because it gives us a clever detail, because it gives us a way to see the weight of the moment. The fruit is pressed, and what is inside is revealed. In Gethsemane, Jesus is pressed, and what is revealed is not panic, not resentment, not escape. What is revealed is love in obedience, love that prays, love that yields, love that rises from the ground and walks toward the ones coming to arrest him. And that means Jesus does not meet human pressure from a distance. He knows the place where the soul feels pressed. He knows what it is to pray while others sleep. He knows what it is to face a cup no one else can drink. He knows surrender when surrender costs everything. So why does this detail matter? Because Gethsemane was not just a garden. It was the place where the meaning of the cross began to appear before the cross was even raised. The name points to an olive press. The scene shows pressure. Jesus is sorrowful. The disciples are sleeping. The cup is before him. The arrest is near. The cross is coming. And in that pressure, Jesus prays. He does not run from the Father. He does not hide his sorrow. He does not pretend obedience is painless. He brings the full weight of the moment into prayer and says, "Not as I will, but as you will." That is the deeper meaning underneath the garden. Gethsemane shows us that surrender is not always calm. Sometimes surrender trembles. Sometimes surrender repeats the same prayer. Sometimes surrender happens while the people closest to you cannot stay awake with you. But Jesus still rises. He rises from prayer before the soldiers arrive. He rises before Judas comes near. He rises before the trial, before the thorns, before the nails, before the cross. The pressure does not defeat him. It reveals him. If this kind of Bible storytelling helps you see Scripture with fresh eyes, subscribe. We are not rushing past the small details. We are learning to see the deeper meaning underneath them. Carry 3 truths with you. First, Gethsemane shows that Jesus' suffering did not begin only when men arrested him. The pressure was already present in prayer. Second, the olive press image helps us see surrender differently. True obedience may grieve, tremble, and still say yes. Third, Jesus is not distant from the pressure we cannot explain. He entered the place of pressing before us, and he did not turn away. So the next time you picture Gethsemane, do not see only trees in the night. See the garden. See the cup. See the sleeping disciples. See the olive press hidden inside the name. And see Jesus, pressed by the weight of what was coming, still giving himself to the Father in love. Which detail in Gethsemane did you never notice before? The garden, the cup, the sleeping disciples, or the olive press?